This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
This chapter deals with sustainable competitive advantage and how we might achieve that. And it deals with three distinct parts. First of all, there is what's called the generic strategies. This is something invented by Michael Porter, of which is cost leadership, differentiation and focus. Very important. It then goes on to look at what are called the strategic direction of the company or the organization. And this is something which we will see is called Ansoff's matrix. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the concept of the value chain. So first of all, the generic strategies. And by kind of generic strategy, think almost of a fundamental. The fundamental way in which let's assume a profit-seeking organization, the fundamental way in which we go about making profits and good profits. Because with all of these competitive advantages, here the very title of this slide says sustainable competitive advantage. To some extent, any idiot can get a competitive advantage, do better than your rivals maybe for a year, but that's not what we want. We want to be able to do better than everybody else year after year after year. And to do that, we need to adopt one of these fundamental or generic strategies. Now we'll look, first of all, we'll come back to the focus one later, but we'll look first of all at the cost leaders and differentiators. And what we're going to start with here is a manufacturer of an ordinary product, selling into a competitive market. And this manufacturer is a very ordinary manufacturer selling a very ordinary product. This is a person in the middle here. The price is fairly low because there's nothing particularly special about the product, and it's being sold into a competitive market, and this keeps the price down. You can't increase your prices in that sort of competitive market. And also the costs are pretty high here because this is not a fantastically efficient manufacturer, and they make a very low profit. They are stuck in the middle. They are stuck between a low price and high costs, and they're kind of condemned really to making relatively little miserable profits in here. And Porter would say there's no sustainable future for you there because these profits are so small. First of all, it'll probably irritate your shareholders. They won't want to give you any more capital. But secondly, where are you going to get the money to market well? Where are you going to get the money to put into research and development to develop new products and to keep up with or ahead of the competition? So he says there's no long-term life as being this person stuck in the middle, trapped between low prices and high costs. He said what you have to do is to either become a cost leader or a differentiator. So if we move to the cost leader one here, they are still making ordinary products being sold into the same competitive market, but what they've managed to do is to have reduced their costs. They become very efficient, and indeed you become the most efficient producer if you are the cost leader. So you're opening up your margin by bringing down your costs. And now we have an acceptable profit, a nice high profit that gives us margins for safety, allows us to reinvest in new machinery and develop new products and keep ahead of the game and so on. Now, if you're going to be doing this, really the only trick you have up your sleeve is keeping your costs down. And in such an organization, it is absolutely focused on keeping costs down. It's actually ferocious on cost controls. Very strict budgets, lots of reports coming out where you have to explain any budget overruns and so on. There'd be really quite complex authorizations with anything else to, you don't want to spend any more money and so on. They've probably got quite a kind of harsh view of employees. minimum possible benefits, minimum possible wages, etc., that they can get away with. But because of this, keeping their eye on costs and so on, they can make fantastic profits. And a very good example of a cost leader is an airline. I don't know if you're in the UK, you will know about it, called Ryanair. Ryanair is a low-cost, low-fare airline, and it really watches the money very, very carefully. And it has over, even in years where other airlines are making huge losses, Ryanair will be coming in, making $500 million in some of the worst years of aviation in the from about 2010 onwards. The other way you can go to escape from this low profit trap is to say, well, I'm not actually competing with you guys. I'm going to be making a different product, a better product, for which I can charge a premium price. In other words, you differentiate yourself, you differentiate your product. So what you're doing there is raising your margin by raising the prices. It could be your costs even go up a little bit, but as long as the profit margin is bigger, you're going to be doing better. How do you differentiate yourselves? Well, it could be brand. So some clothing brands, just simply because they have a logo on them, some brands maybe of perfume and cosmetics, they attract very high prices. It would just necessarily reflect the cost of producing the product there. We could say also to distinguish between these two, a kind of low cost producer here might be Lenovo. So Lenovo produces most of its, or all of its computers in China, but are producing perfectly good, but ordinary kind of PCs, laptops and so on. But maybe over here what we have is Apple. Well, people seem to be willing to pay a premium price for Apple. Maybe it does things slightly better, but certainly a lot of it's to do with the styling and maybe the branding of the product. And of course we know Apple makes fantastic amounts of money as well. If you are stuck in the middle, you have to be realistic. Where could we move to? And if you are a small family company, really the chances of you becoming a cost leader are terribly small. If you're going to get your costs down, that nearly always goes hand in hand with becoming a very, very big manufacturer operating on a global kind of a scale. If you are a small family company, then maybe where you get a bit of a living is not trying to compete head on with really big manufacturers, but you make a product which is different and better in some way for some people. Better doesn't necessarily mean better quality, it just means it suits these people better and they're willing to pay for it. The other strategy we talked about was a focus strategy. And a focus strategy is where you say, well, I'm not going to try to sell to the whole market. I'm going to focus or concentrate on one brand. It's like niche marketing. Not one brand, but one segment of the market. It's like niche marketing. And in theory, you can become a focus, low-cost person, or you become a focused differentiator. It always seems to me that the more natural way to go is to become a focused differentiator. You find a small segment of the market which is maybe not very well covered by the big players who are interested in the mass market and so on. So what they do is a small manufacturer makes a special product just for this small segment of the market. Maybe because it's the only manufacturer who services that segment of the market, that allows it to put its price up and so on. Example maybe of a focus type of supplier you get in the holiday companies. We have a holiday company in the UK called Crystal. And Crystal focuses just on skiing holidays. And by and large, it focuses on skiing holidays. They tend to be relatively high price anyway, simply because of all the lift passes and equipment and things which are needed. Another example of a holiday company which focuses into quite a different segment is Saga. And Saga focuses on holidays really for older people, maybe from 60 upwards and so on. And they know that when people get older, they want quieter holidays. They maybe want less arduous days. They want quieter hotels. There has to be a lift in it and so on. Now, in theory, Saga could be a differentiator or a cost leader. Saga could take the view that these customers are retired. They don't have a lot of money, so we'll go for the low cost leader. Or they could take the view here will become a differentiator because these people now have a lot of time perhaps to go further distances. They don't have to take children with them, so that keeps it cheaper. And maybe when you get to kind of 60, 65, you're looking for kind of a holiday of a lifetime, and maybe you're willing to kind of splash out on the more luxury, high margin sort of a holiday which is there. It is possible, but you have to be clever about it, to become both a cost leader and a differentiator at the same time. But usually it means you have to have quite separate brands. So Toyota has done this. Toyota has got its, what you might call its cost leader element, which is Toyota cars, producing very good but ordinary cars. And then you have Lexus, which is part of Toyota, which is like the differentiator, which produces executive style upmarket cars at a much higher price. But they have been very clever at keeping these two separate. Porter says you have to adopt one of these generic strategies. You have to become a cost leader or a differentiator to widen your profit margin. And then there is a kind of an independent choice. Are you going to be a focused differentiator or a focused cost leader, or are you going to try and service all of these markets? Second, we need to look at the strategic direction, and I think I wrote on the opening screen that this is where we come and look at something called Ansoff's matrix. This is a remarkable little diagram because it tells you all the ways in which you could increase profits, and if of course you increase profits, you are in a way your life is becoming more sustainable as an organization, certainly as a profit-seeking organization. And it says you look at markets, and there's the present market and potentially new markets, and then you look at the product, present products and potentially new products. And it said, if you stay with your current market and your current product, then you are in here, top left quadrant. And what can we do if we stay in our home market and we don't develop new products? Then one of the things we can try to do, and remember what we're trying to do here is really to increase profit. Okay, that's what we'd like to see. Profits going up because this gives us more security and allows us, as I say, to reinvest in research and develop in new machinery and so on, to keep up to date, to keep marketing. And one of the things we can do is you can become more efficient, efficiency gains, which basically means cost saving, though efficiency gains gives it a more of a positive spin. If you go into your company and say, okay, we're going to have cost savings, everybody gets worried about their job because their salary is a cost. If you go in and say, right, we're going to have efficiency gains, then it's maybe possible for people to see that slightly more positively. Now, that's not going to be huge, these efficiency gains. Don't think you're going to be cutting costs like 50% at a stroke. Cutting costs by 5-10% makes people's eyes water, really. It's really quite difficult. Or what we might do is to go for penetration. This is basically bigger market share. So instead of maybe having a market share of 20%, you go to 22%. Again, don't be thinking you're going to go from 20% to 40% anytime soon, because when you try to gain market share, the competitors fight against you, they retaliate. And supermarkets are really proud to announce they've maybe had a kind of 2% increase on like-for-like sales over the year. They think that's a real kind of victory there. But it all should make more profits. Consolidation is maybe where you merge with another company, so you become bigger. And as you become bigger, hopefully we'll get some economies of scale. You can maybe merge the IT departments, merge the accounting departments. You can make use of each other's customer lists and so on. And finally, there is withdrawal. You can withdraw from some markets. Perhaps the market itself is actually loss-making, but perhaps it is that the market makes a profit, but it's a small profit, but it's distracting you from where the bigger opportunities are. So you might actually do better by withdrawing from a market and kind of concentrating your firepower somewhere else. Now, by and large, this quadrant is low risk, low return. You are staying with your existing product, you're staying with your existing market, but the improvements you're going to get tend to be fairly modest, but at least they're fairly predictable, fairly safe. Next one we could look at is product development. Maybe an example or a brand to think about here is again in the UK, but you may be familiar with it in some other places. A brand called Dyson. Now Dyson's a very good company, very clever engineering, and it essentially specializes in making vacuum cleaners, really domestic vacuum cleaners. And it had a particular patent, if you like, to these vacuum cleaners. And it has a whole range of them, big ones, little ones, portable ones for your car and all sorts of things. And in a way, it had more or less saturated the market for vacuum cleaners. So what it did was it said, right, I'm going to develop a washing machine. And because it had a kind of reputation for innovation, it decided to make a very innovative washing machine. So we all know that in washing machines there's a drum that kind of goes around like this. Dyson said we're going to have two drums, one will go like this and one will go the other way. So we have them kind of going counter to each other, and this will kind of maybe, a bit like washing clothes by hand, will maybe do a better job. And they spent a long time and a lot of money developing this, and they had a very good history in developing technology, and they made it work, but the price they tried to sell it at was nearly twice what an ordinary washing machine would sell at. And even after all of this development and promotion, really it didn't last in the market much longer than about 6 months or thereabouts. If it had worked, it would have been a fantastic extra revenue stream and extra profits. But of course, the danger is, the risk is with this, that you develop a product and nobody wants it. So if this one here was low risk and low return, this is, if you like, slightly higher risk or medium risk, and maybe a medium return. Let's put it like that. You might have to write off your investment. Similarly here, if you go and try to launch yourself in another market, another country, for example, and a good example here is the USA and our supermarkets. And there's been a whole lot of attempts by UK retailing organizations to try to launch themselves successfully in America, and they mostly come to grief. The latest one was Tesco, which is really quite a successful, very large supermarket company in the UK, and it decided to launch a series of relatively small outlets, food outlets. I think they were called Fresh and Ready, particularly in California. They're going to do a test market in California. And they researched it extensively. They had employees of Tesco going and living with Californian families and so on to kind of study their shopping habits and so on. And they launched this string of relatively small food outlets, like a Tesco Metro in California. And they hammered at it for a number of years and eventually gave up. Something very subtle had gone wrong in it. But they gave up after having spent several £billion on it. So just because you're good in one market doesn't mean you're going to be good in another market. If it had worked, it would have been good and would have given substantial extra profits. But there's a risk you can't repeat the trick everywhere. So let's put this one at medium risk as well, and medium return. And then we have diversification. And to some extent, I think you're safe to regard this as a sign of desperation almost. You can have related diversification or unrelated. And related probably works. So an example of related diversification, you may have come across the kind of brand, but there's SAS, Radisson. Now SAS stands for Scandinavian Airline System. It's the countries of Norway, Sweden, Denmark and so on. That's their airline. And Radisson is a chain of hotels. And I think SAS owns Radisson, SAS Radisson it's called. Now you can see how that would work, that sort of diversification. How it would be worth an airline taking over maybe a string of hotels. Because if the hotels are at the airports, then when people book a flight, you can say, would you like a hotel? There's a certain, you can use the passenger lists then to market your hotel and so on. You can put the points earned in flights, add them to the points earned in the hotel and so on. There are all sorts of ways in which there can be quite good cooperation between these to increase profits. Unrelated diversification is nearly always a big mistake. This would be like a supermarket taking over a house building company. And you say, well, why have you done that? And the first thing that management might say, synergy. Together we can operate more cheaply than separately. We'll save costs, or we'll be able to cross-market. And the reply to that is to say, look, you're a supermarket, you're buying from certain suppliers, you've got certain IT systems, you've got certain skills and so on, certain sorts of accounting. You're a house builder, you're buying from completely different suppliers, completely different marketing techniques needed and so on, completely different IT needed. Where are you going to save costs? And it's not as though you can even cross-market. It's not as though if somebody's down before their weekly shopping, you can offer them a house to buy along with their cornflakes. If they're truly unrelated, there's going to be no synergy. And what often happens here is that one company takes over another company in these unrelated diversification areas, and they begin to meddle with, change a company that had been doing perfectly well, but they meddle with it, they alter it in the wrong way. It's almost, I've taken you over, I have to prove my worth by imposing my will on you. You're my new plaything. And what they actually do is to destroy value. And there's been many as a company that's been taken over, let's say for 5 million, and then 3 years later is sold back to the original owners for 1 million. Because it's messed it up. The only justification really for unrelated diversification is if you spot a company that's badly managed, you buy it, you chuck out and replace the existing managers and directors, you turn the company round, so you turn it maybe from loss making to profit making just by ordinary, housekeeping, getting good managers in, and if you are making bigger profits, you'll increase its value, then you can sell it. But if you buy a company which is unrelated, which is already trading very profitably and very well, there is nowhere the gain is going to come from. You're not going to get it from synergy, and you're not going to get it from profit increases. And again, I say the danger is your meddling with these companies will destroy value. The final thing we look at in this chapter is the value chain, which is again a kind of invention of Porter. And you have to know what's on this, really. The shape isn't quite so important, but you have to know the names in the boxes. What goes along the bottom here, what are called the primary activities. Because what's really been sketched on this here are all the activities, or in a way all the processes that an organization will take on board. And I'll go through what they are in a moment. And across the top then we have what are called these support activities. So the primary activities, these are a bit like direct costs. Inbound logistics is getting raw materials into the company, and there's choices to make there. We could send our lorry out and bring them in. We could get them delivered in by the supplier. When they get to us, we have a choice. Do we actually put them in a warehouse for a little while, maybe for a couple of weeks before we actually use them, and so on. So a lot of different ways. Are we going to have several different suppliers or one different supplier? How are we actually going to do it? Are we going to bring them into a central warehouse and then kind of redistribute them through the manufacturing company? All sorts of ways of getting raw materials, all sorts of choices to make. We have the operations, which is basically production. We have outbound logistics, and again, there's choice in there. It could be that we get customers to come to us. It could be that we have our own fleet of lorries and we develop and we distribute those to our customers. It could be we use a logistics company like DHL or TNT, and we get somebody else to do the distribution. Are we going to keep them in a warehouse for a little while before we distribute them? There's all sorts of choices we need to make. Marketing and sales, how do customers find us? How do we find out what our customers want? And of course the internet is making great inroads into that. Service is after-sales service. Any source of revenue really that potentially comes after you sell the main item. So it could be installing what you're selling, it could be training people on it, there can be maintenance contracts on what you've sold, there can be selling consumables that are used in the main product. But these are all kind of very active, almost direct cost things that we can be doing. The support activities are much more like overheads, fixed overheads. The firm infrastructure is to do with maybe the head office, how we're organising the accounting department, and all of that kind of stuff that has to be within a largish company just to support it almost. There is technology development, which is basically research and development. That can be researching, developing either new products or new processes. And the reason the Porters kind of put these kind of horizontally along here is you can, for example, research and develop different ways of manufacturing, different operations. You can research and develop different ways of marketing. You can research and develop maybe different ways of distribution and so on. So these support activities support potentially any and all of the primary activities. Human resources management, the recruitment, the training, the appraisal, the discipline, the promotion, the retention, and so on of your people. Very, very important. And then Porter rather oddly splits out procurement from inbound logistics. Procurement is placing orders for raw materials, deciding from whom to buy and negotiating prices, and also placing orders for stuff like non-current assets. Now, think that on this we have every activity, every process that the company undertakes, and these processes of course cost money. So let's say that all of these processes are some of the debit side almost of the profit and loss account. Let's say it comes to 10 million. And you make your goods, you sell your goods, and remarkably, the sales come to 12 million. Allowing you, of course, to make a profit there of 2 million. The profit margin, that's what the purpose is. And Porter says there's something rather magical going on there. How come in exchange really for you spending 10, you get 12 coming in? How do you perform that trick? I mean, for example, why are people paying you 12 million when they can see from your profit and loss account that your total expenses are only 10? Shouldn't they take issue with you, or shouldn't they maybe do this themselves? And Porter said, well, the reason people are willing to spend 12 million on something which only costs you 10 million is you must be bringing something else to the party. It could be you're bringing know-how. And if you were to, the customers to spend 12 million, they wouldn't actually achieve the goals. They wouldn't be capable of producing what you produce. It might be that what you bring to the party is economies of scale. So maybe this supplier that we've got here has got 10 equally sized customers. So if you're taking a tenth of the output, you're going to be paying them revenue of 1.2 million. But if you were to set up a factory a tenth of the size, the chances are it's going to cost you more than 10 million, because you do, as factories get very large, you get economies of scale, and maybe instead of the production actually costing you only 1 million, 10% of the 10 million, it's going to cost you 1.5 million. Because you lose these great big machinery, you haven't got enough going on to do shift working, you haven't got as big leverage with the suppliers and so on there. So what they might be actually bringing to this, and what you're willing to pay for, is the economies of scale which they have, which they can pass on to you. Or maybe what they're doing is something which you don't want to do, maybe because it's too risky. Yes, I could do it, but it is distracting and it's risky. And what Porter was saying is, you as a supplier, as the owner of this value chain, you have to know what it is that your customers really appreciate. So for some companies, what the customer really appreciates is very low cost. What's being made is a very ordinary product, and they just want a very low unit cost. And in that sort of situation, sustainable advantage, if you come, like sustainable competitive advantage, comes from you having really efficient operations, really good procurement, so that you beat down the price of the raw materials and so on. Maybe quite a bit of kind of research and development into how can we make this component that's being bought from us, how can we make it cheap? And anything you do to that increases the cost of this is going to irritate your customer and is going to jeopardize your sustainable competitive advantage. Or what it might be is what your customer really values is that you produce products of fantastic quality, that hardly any fail. Maybe you're in the industry, in aviation, and maybe you're making parts for aeroplanes which must not fail. And there what you'll be doing is not trying to reduce the cost of production. You might be saying, well, I'm going to actually increase the cost of production, but because of that, I'm using better material, for example, I'm going to be producing better products, and I know my customer will pay for that. And the procurement here would not be finding the cheapest supplier, it might be finding the supplier with the most resilient raw material, the best raw material, the fewest flaws in it. Your technology development will be saying, how can I maybe organize my quality control so that I'll be able to, maybe I'll begin x-raying stuff or something so I can pick up little cracks in it and it never gets out. And I'll maybe be putting a lot more effort into training. So you have to know yourself, really. You have to know what is it that my customer really appreciates, and you must be careful not to destroy that, because if you destroy the value added, then the customers will abandon you and you will have lost your competitive advantage.
This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.